going to the time, sacrificing the time and other resources, money and so forth, that it took to get here. We don't take it for granted that people have to make sacrifices in order to make a trip to come to rural New Hampshire for a conference like this. So we are very much grateful that you took the time and the trouble. We would have had some more people here. Some people that were planning on coming couldn't make it, and one of the reasons was the hotels something like tripled or quadrupled in cost because of the strange conditions that made leaf peeping season slightly earlier, peak leaf peeping season. For those who are foreigners, this is what's called leaf peeping season here. People come here to leaf peep. That is to peep at leaves, the foliage, the beautiful fall New England foliage. Because we had a horrible drought this summer, and because of early frost, witness today's cold, that accelerated the leaf season. So the glory of the New England fall color is a little bit more mature now than it would normally be at this time of year. And supply and demand, the hotels ratcheted up their prices. So we would have had at least a couple more people here if that had not been the case. But thank you all for being the ones, the elites who were able to show up. So now I want to take you on a trip down memory lane, all the way back to 2019, 6 years ago. It seems so long ago. It's in the midst of the pre-COVID antiquity and pre-Biden antiquity and pre-Palestinian Israeli relations starting on October 7th, 2023, before which apparently there were no events that had ever had any bearing on the relationship of those two peoples. If you can think back to 2019, let's consider a few things. First of all, that was the first year that we were under the precept. And that year I gave some explanations in these opening remarks as to what was going on then. It's still going on now. We're almost in our 7th year of this, and I'm hoping that we can wrap certain things up this year. And though nothing can be guaranteed. The wheels of justice grind very, very slowly. 2019 was also the first year that Gary Potter didn't speak at our conference. And I talked a little bit about that. Now, some of you may know this if you read Catholicism.org regularly. But Gary Potter died on September 9th of this year. And I found out a couple of weeks later from his daughter, Veronica, who was then informing every friend she could think of to let know about her dad's passing. Gary is still with us in spirit, you might say. And if you haven't read Gary Potter before or haven't listened to Gary Potter speak before, fear not. There are 172 Gary Potter articles on Catholicism.org. I checked yesterday. 172. He kept writing even after he was unable to come up to join us for the conference. And I think the last thing he wrote for us was in August of 2022. So we have many of his offerings available. Also, he gave 24 conference talks over the history, and he participated in some way or another at every St. Benedict Center conference from 1997 to 2018. I counted 24. There should be 29 because I know he was at every. 24. That's right. He was at every single one for 21 years, and I think a couple of those he spoke more than once because we used to do that. He also emceed. That's right. He was the master of the bell, the bell was passed on first to Charles Colomb, and when he was found unworthy, It was passed on to Mike Church, who's now our MC. He's our MC. Get it? MC Mike Church. Okay. That year, I also spoke a little bit about today's saint and his milieu, tying it in with our theme of that year. But I'm going to repeat those comments, not only because I didn't have enough time to write my opening remarks, but really because repetitio est mater studiorum, as they say. Repetition is the mother of learning. And also because these events, this milieu that I'm going to describe to you, fits into this year's theme as well, reasons for the hope that is in us, which is based upon St. Peter's utterance in 1 Peter 3:15. One of the institutions most associated with the Renaissance papacy was the so-called cardinal nephew, a man related to the reigning supreme pontiff who was created cardinal by that Pope. Catholic Reformation. Speaking of which, most of us know that St. Charles Borromeo was called the soul of the Council of Trent and had a large share in compiling the Roman Catechism, which is also known as the Catechism of the Council of Trent. He became a major figure in the reforms of the Catholic Reformation, founding seminaries for the formation of priests and making his own archdiocese a model of true reform. Again, it was Milan, which was at that time, and I think still is, in the Western Church, the largest archdiocese in the world. Somebody knows other than that, please correct me. Milan, largest archdiocese in the world. Okay. Now, in his charity, he expended his personal wealth and even went into debt to help the victims of a plague that had broken out in that city of Milan. He also showed great interest in the plight of persecuted English Catholics, personally hosting Saints Edmund Campion and Ralph Sherwin on their way to England, ministering to English Catholics in exile in Italy, and even carrying on his person an image of the not yet beatified St. John Fisher. A contemporary of St. Charles Borromeo was St. Ignatius of Loyola's disciple, today's saint, St. Francisco Borja. I'll call him by his proper name. He and his family are known by the more commonly by the Italianized form of their name, Borgia. These are the corrupt Borgias that I just mentioned, along with the Della Roveres and the Borgheses and the Colonnas and so forth, as being these corrupt Italian families that were vying for power, and the power was, of course, in the hands of the papacy. He was of that family. It was actually a Spanish family that had moved to Italy. Part of it moved to Italy. But Francisco Borja is today's saint. He was the fourth Duke of Gandia in Aragon, Spain. He was the third Superior General of the Society of Jesus. Against his will, as we were told in the Matins reading for his feast today, he was put under obedience to accept the governorship of his order of the Society of Jesus. He made a vow never to accept any sort of ecclesiastical dignities. The collect for his feast, which is proper, praises his humility because of this. And he is another major figure of the Catholic Reformation. He was the grandnephew of Cesare Borgia, and he was the great-grandson of Pope Alexander VI. Think of that. Great-grandpa was the Pope. We must, when we come upon such things in church history, recall the parable of the kingdom of heaven, known as the parable of the wheat and the tares, something upon which we ought to meditate from time to time. You know, there's wheat and tares. There's the good crop and the bad seed side by side in the church, and the bad seed will only be taken out at the harvest time, right? We know what happens to it. It's thrown into the unquenchable fire, but the good grains are put into the master's barns. Now, as Virgil said in his Eclogue number 4, Si celides muse Paulo Maiora canamus, Sicilian muses, let us sing a somewhat loftier strain. We're not here to talk about scandals, we're here to talk about hope. And our conference theme this year is Reasons for the Hope That Is in Us. And I talked about that sort of scandalous prelude today for a specific reason. The church is still in crisis. I mean, it's been in crisis all my life. But it's had numerous and somewhat lengthy times of crisis in the past, all through our history. This is why it's important we study church history. But side by side with scoundrels in the church, there have always been and always will be saints. And one of the reasons that we have hope, Sister Philomena is going to talk a great deal about some specifics concerning the theological virtue of hope. And she's going to explain that hope isn't what a lot of us make hope to be in our common parlance. It's not optimism. It's not, the glass is half full versus the glass is half empty. That's kind of a worldly, secular adaptation. It's not the passion of hope, which could hope for evil things as well as good. But the theological virtue of hope, St. Thomas says, if it's not a theological virtue, it's not a virtue at all. We can only hope with a virtue by the theological virtue of hope. I'll let Sister Maria Philomena explain that in her talk. But one of the grounds for our hope, one of the objects of our hope, the remote object, the most important one, the ultimate one, is heaven, right? That we hope to achieve beatitude. We hope to be brought into the beatific vision. But we also say in the act of hope that we hope for the forgiveness of sins and the help of thy grace, right? And the help of thy grace isn't just some abstract thing. Grace comes to us in concreto, right? Grace comes to us in our concrete circumstances. God can give us grace through all sorts of means. The catechisms are correct when they say that God's not bound by his sacraments to give us grace. Of course he's not. But in addition to those invisible and very intangible ways that we receive grace mysteriously in our own souls by God's inner workings there, we receive grace through the sacraments, through the life of the church, through the preaching of her ministers, right? All of the point of the church to teach, to govern, to sanctify, those three offices of the bishops, which the pastors of the church, the lower pastors, participate in. All of that has to do with that secondary object of our hope, the helps that we have in this life in order to achieve beatitude in the next life. No matter how much the church is in crisis, that's not an excuse for us not to become saints. And no matter how much the church is in crisis, that doesn't mean that the church isn't what she was intended to be by her divine founder, which is to say, the means of salvation. And to have in herself all of those means to achieve the ends, which are her proper ends. The church is a perfect society. You'll hear it stated that the church and the state are perfect societies. I actually know a Dominican priest who says technically the state's not a perfect society in the full definition of the term, only the church is. But what does this mean when we say perfect society? It doesn't mean everybody in it is perfect. What it means is it has all the means at its disposal to achieve its ends. That's all that term means, perfect society. And the church still is that, no matter how beset she is with scandal or, teachers who are teaching all kinds of crazy errors. I'll speak about that a bit in my talk. But she is and remains what she always was, the exclusive, only, but also efficacious ark of salvation. We can still have salvation from her sacraments. We can still get truth from her teachers and so forth. So that is actually a solid basis for our hope. We don't put hope in a cult of personality. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my talk. We don't put hope in a cult of personality. What do you think of Pope Leo? Who cares? Really, who cares? It's not a cult of personality. The church has never been a cult of personality. And all throughout my lifetime, though, the papacy has been treated as a cult of personality. And we need to grow up and ditch that and realize it's not about the Pope. It's not about this, that, or the other Pope. It's about the papacy. It's about the church. It's about her teachings. It's about her morals. It's about the grace that we receive through her that lead us to the Holy Trinity. That's what it's about. You know, like they say about the kings, right? The king is dead. Long live the king. Okay, one of these days, Pope Leo is going to die. Okay, the papacy remains. And we don't want to be so caught up in the current news cycle or what the Twitterati are saying on social media about the latest scandal, you know, the blessing of some chunk of ice. We don't want to be so caught up in that silliness that we forget the supernatural purposes of the church. And I think I've exhausted my time, and I'm going to bring to the microphone our MC, so that he can introduce our first speaker. Have you had your coffee, John?
I'm getting there, brother. As long as this introduction goes a while, I'll be fine.
Okay, very good. All right. Don't take that seriously because we're on a tight schedule. All right. Thank you very much.
This guy is tall, man. Well, brother, thanks a lot. I'm down $1,000 already today. I had to scrap my idea for papal trading cards. I'm out of grand. No, kidding. Where's Sister Gabriella? I was telling Sister Gabriella. She says, "Oh, Mike, you're a wonderful MC." I'm like, I was the last guy left standing when Charles bailed out. I was the only one that was willing to come up here and host this thing. And so out of pure desperation, brother, please chose me. And I've been here ever since. And I've tried to get out of it, but he won't let me. So thank you and welcome. Bonjour, mes amis. Yes. Bienvenue, mes amis. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good to have you. Sir Charles is here. Now, if you want Charles as an MC, we can do that. I could do that if you would like Charles to actually be here. I'm sure that there's a way that we can find. What does this portly gentleman in the front want? What is it, sir? So I'm just killing time. I'm slaughtering innocent airtime. They're awaiting Commander Sharpe to finish his coffee. Are you ready, John? Okay. It's my honor, and it truly is an honor, to introduce Commander of the United States Navy, Commander John Sharpe, who is the founder of IHS Press, and of late, Catholic Land Movement conferences he has been speaking at. I believe he also came to your place, Aaron, and spoke recently. John is fluent in so many communications in Catholicity, including music. Sacred music. I better say sacred. He'll come and correct me. Sacred music and chant, and and in history. And he's published so many books. I encourage you to go to the IHS Press website and investigate them. Especially our favorite book, John Action, by Youssef. Yes. So John is going to speak with us this morning on our metaphysical dreams, the politics of Christendom as vision and remedy for national and international ills. And boy, do we need some remedies for international ills. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander John Sharpe.
Well, thank you for having me back, brother. I always wonder every year when that email message doesn't come out as expected. I figure I'm the one guy left off the list. I've finally done it. And I wouldn't blame you at all. I wouldn't. So I appreciate your indulgence, all of you. And Michael, thank you for that beautiful, charming introduction. I meant only to say that when I hear the term music, I think sacred music, the same way as a brother was mentioning this debate, which I've just been briefed on, that the state by itself is not a perfect society. We'll get into that a little bit, perhaps. I do want to remedy the marginally secular prayer we offered to the Holy Ghost with a fully proper prayer to the Holy Ghost. If you'll indulge me and try to sing. Who raise your hand and tell me if you think that you can't sing. Please, just don't be shy. I just want to know what I'm dealing with. And anyone. So I have some younger children still, and we indulge in a Pixar film from time to time. It's all Jewish screenwriters. I think they're quite funny. That's one thing they're good at. Anyone remember the movie Ratatouille? About, anyone can cook, right? So anyone can sing. I mean, it's really true. There are maybe 3 exceptions. Somehow they all end up on the altar. I don't know how that works, but it's literally over many years. Brother says the church has been in crisis since you can't possibly be that old, brother. But it's really only 3 in a long lifetime of traditionalism for myself. 3 priests out of 30 years worth of going to mass who legitimately can't carry a tune in a bucket. But that's very it's exceptional. So just try, bear with me. You guys are going to kill me for this. I have to leave the camera and the microphone because I need to point out I am retired military, so I have a command voice. Notice this. We call this. Anyone know what this prayer at the bottom is called? Oh, thank you, sister. God bless you. That wasn't pre-staged, by the way. That's all extemporaneous from sister. Notice here, we have where was my keyboard? This here, in eodem spiritu recta sapere. Recta sapere. Can we get a good translation of recta sapere? Yes, sister. Yes.
Savoring wisdom.
Yes. But what about the recta part? Recta. Yes.
Relishing what is right.
Yes. Okay. And so now I'm not a Latinist, but I would quibble a little bit and say, because we're asking God, who the hearts of the faithful, the Holy Ghost teaches with the illustration or the informing. This is the verb, right? Give to us, that's nobis, in the same spirit. So this is the infinitive. Give us what? Give us to know or to taste. That's where relish comes in. In Italian, my Latin is what the Jesuits would call kitchen Latin. It's learned from Italian. But in Italian, sapere is to know, to taste, to appreciate, to digest, and all those. Of course, I've heard that the Italians and the Latinists of the ancient Rome, there's some genetic connection there. I'm not sure what that is. But and then recta also is, what about our old terms, recta ratio agibilium, right? This is the Latin phrase for the moral law, is right reason, recta ratio agibilium, in the things that are done. Brother, I rely on you to. I'm stepping on your toes, and so far so good. What's that?
What's Shiensky?
Where? Oh, in here or anywhere?
Recta ratio semiotico.
Right. And how about art then?
Recta ratio factibium.
Thank you. Good. I thought you were going to lose that third one. Which by the way, because there's these 2 different, and I'm thinking of action, right? The Scientia is more up here. When we talk about the moral law of doing and the making of art, you will frequently, and this has to do with your comment about the Grandpappy Pope, there's 2 different realms of action where the artist is not always a model of morality. And so you'll get in the debates that go on in Catholic literature, someone's teaching Flannery O'Connor, or I like to read Eric Gill, on craftsmanship. Gill was a bit of a nut, with the crazy stuff that he did that if all the men want to meet me afterwards, I'll tell you the kind of stuff he did. But it has nothing to do with his art, because art is a thing unto itself. That's why we have recta ratio factibilium, right reason applied to things that are made. And David, the carpenter, and many others here, of course, good with the hands. Our art has its own rules, and so when I get upset about music, and you might, I'll try to work a pot shot in here somehow. You dodged, you inoculated yourself. We're anti-vaxxers, but you had a good inoculation. Can someone raise their hand, please? Don't leave me hanging. Thank you. And it's good because you're engaged with the text. You're reading the Latin. You cover up the right-hand side or left, whatever page. And by the way, Charles, in the book world, we have the verso and in the book publishing world, the verso and, if you're a typesetter, the verso and the, thank you. Who said that? Thank you, sister. That's because of your rosary book, right? So the verso is what's on the back side when you turn the page. The recto is the front, the right side of the page. Sorry. I was waiting for you to say that. He did. Beg your pardon. I knew I was going to get in trouble. I needed a lapel mic. Recta sapere is to taste rightly. And in this context of the prayer to the Holy Ghost, the taste rightly is let us know everything that we need to know. I would submit mostly for right action because we're looking for moral guidance, but of course we're talking about wisdom, the elements of knowledge that Brother talked about. So, that's probably an E flat, right? Very sancte. I want you to sing along with me. We get to a clevis. There's a middle part where we're going to stop. Brother, you remember where that pause is that we used to do, right? Somewhere. Hold on. I won't speak. I'll just point. Right here. Sorry. The thing that I just pointed to, I want you to slow down there a little bit because it's nice to break up that phrase. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. This is a prayer. This is the real. He who prays sings twice. Stand up, if you would, please, just to make sure it's early in the morning. I've had my coffee. A little under the weather. Veni Sancte Spiritu. That's too high. That's for all of you people who can't sing. Veni Sancte Spiritus. Repletuorum corda fidelium, et tui amoris, in eis signem accende. And the response is right there. Emite spiritum plume creabuntur. Oremus, Deus qui cor vederim sancti spiritus illustratione loquisti, da nobis in eram spiritu recta sapere, et Deus semper consolatione gaudere, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Please be seated. So, good morning, Father. Good morning. Okay, thank you very much. Now, what's the point of all that? Brother, every conference theme has been just getting increasingly happy. You remember, I know I got in big trouble last year. But what was the theme of last year? Was you didn't want too much griping. You wanted a constructive, affirmative articulation, defense of the faith. Do you recall the theme from last year, or do you remember our conversation? Looks like you don't.
No, it has something to do with joy.
Yes, but anyway, the themes are all the themes are all very happy, and I really with docility. I'm not accused often of being docile, but in my heart I feel like I'm quite docile. I do try to respect the theme that I'm given. I have, as you know, from those of you who've been stuck with me for these many years, sometimes I prepare sursum corda, was it, right? Sursum corda, okay. Sursum corda with hope. Prepare, these very heavy substantive talks because there's so much I'd like to deliver. I'm the mere transmitter. None of this comes from me. It's just things I pick up along the way that I pass on. The term we would use is tradition, right? This is what tradition is, just someone passing it on. I then go to where I chuck the outline and say, there's just way too much. I never cover it. And then while Mike was giving that beautiful and overly flattering introduction, I start scrambling with notes like, I got to prepare something. And then I get a sheet like this with arrows and guidance and things everywhere. I'm like, there's no way to cover all this. Hopeless. So just bear with me. It's kind of a ride. We just get on the vehicle together and go wherever it goes. But that's why we have to insist on the Holy Ghost, because the Holy Ghost gives all of these presentations, and we just try to we try to just do whatever He tells us. The title says it all, and obviously there's so much in it. There's no way to do justice to it in an hour presentation, in a lifetime, in many lifetimes of much work. We have not just the historical knowledge, but we have also the belief as Catholics. This is interesting. It's not, we'll leave the theologians and those who specialize in acts of the magisterium to tell us what the value is of an encyclical, how binding it is. I certainly don't pay any attention to anything from these modern popes, but I quibble with a few lines in a few encyclicals, even from the good old days. And I defend my right to do that, and brother could, if need be, either correct me or explain why, in terms of the matters of dogma, where the sources of our faith come from, how I can get away with that. And we'll, if there's time to get to this, like this scribble down here, I'll explain that to you. But we know, not only from history, but from the faith, Leo especially, Leo the 13, tells us frequently in his encyclicals that there was a period of human history when society, broadly speaking, was governed by the principles of the gospel. This shows up repeatedly in... Oh, God bless you. That's absolutely wonderful. They're going to be very unhappy with that. Okay, I'm sorry. I should have done this in advance. I can, if you want me to repeat the first 10 minutes, I'd be glad to.
Wherever you'd like.
I can refine it. You sure? It's an offer. You don't have to take it. Yeah, God bless you. You're good, brother. I'll tell you what. So, where were we? Leo the 13th, right? Drop one of those, or actually get rid of the V and put two of the I's back. He tells us all the time that there was this period. So the question then arises, well, as a Catholic, am I permitted, as a Catholic, as a serious Catholic who with submissiveness of the intellect says, I am prepared to believe, and I do believe whatever the church tells me to believe. And one of those things is that there was a period of history, call it 500 years, 1,000 years, some debate on that, where, broadly speaking, the principles of the Catholic faith were accepted as organizing principles in society, which isn't to say, brothers, and you can see how the Holy Ghost makes all this work. His brief introduction, quite interesting, I might add, reminds us that the human element of the church, her servants, fall frequently, and they're not always the best examples, and that's because you're dealing with human raw material. It's no big deal. It has nothing to do with the faith, as brother said, nothing to do with the papacy, nothing to do with the institution. It's also from the temporal side of things where we laity operate. We're not anarchists, we're not libertarians, precisely because the modern state is bad in the sense that it does all kinds of rotten things. It doesn't mean that we have no use for government. Unless we chuck Aristotle, St. Thomas, Plato, John, all of the ancients, we can't chuck the concept of government because we know from all of them. I will revert to Thomas, bear with me. You can give a side lecture out there about Bonaventure if you want. I will revert to Thomas to say that we know ultimately government is to make men good. This is what all the books say. It's not supposed to make them good intrusively. You don't have the nanny state, snooping around, looking at what you're doing at home and all that. But the purpose of law, which I'm now dabbling in a little bit, you may have heard the rumor going around that I'm just about halfway through the first semester of law school. And I have to be careful because I'm sure somebody's going to get a hold of this recording. So I would just like to say that it's been a wonderful experience. And no, really, I don't know what you're laughing about. And the week-long orientation where we had to do rock climbing and get with teams and had a rock, paper, scissors contest at the end of the week-long orientation to become an officer of the court to pursue justice and secure people's rights. That was fantastic. And it was such a good use of my time, I don't even know, where to begin. I will end, though, because I'm going to lose it here in a minute. So when we talk about law, the power that God gives to human society, and if you bear with my loose lips, which sink ships, I'm told, the church certainly has a human element because she's visible, right? So the church as a society is visible, it's incarnated, and the state is visible and incarnated. And one of the points I'll mention, since there's no way to go in order, this thing could be upside down for all the good it's doing me. Christopher Dawson, we have some readers of Christopher Dawson, I'm sure. Thank you, Doug. Welcome. Good to see you again. God bless you. So Dawson, in a book of little collection of essays called The Medieval Essays, he says in his, he's a fantastic Catholic historian. a little soft on certain things maybe. He says the best way to look at this question of the two societies, the church and the state, is if one looks at not just the writings of the medieval period, but the practice, it's really one society with two heads. And if you think about that, you can't, Leo the 13th, so this is where I'll start nitpicking some of his encyclicals. Aside from the fact that Rerum Novarum said the bare minimum that needed to be said, and maybe even less than that in condemning capitalism and the free market. Many people were upset when Rerum Novarum came out. It was 100 years late, and it was very, very soft. So, okay, cut him some slack. The church, in order to not send everyone into mortal sin, you can either say, we insist that the Triduum are 3 holy days of obligation. No one's coming. Okay, cancel it. Why? Not because she doesn't care about Holy Week, but because she doesn't want to pile coals of mortal sins on top over and over. So Leo the 13th presumably doesn't want to antagonize and disturb the consciences of all the Catholic capitalists, but it was very soft. Anyway, there's another, let's see, where am I going with that? Leo the 13th. The Dawson's argument is different than what Leo the 13th says. Leo the 13th, throughout his encyclicals, refers to church and state as two independent societies, sovereign in their own spheres. There is some truth to that, clearly, but I think, brother, I don't know if this is the point. I'm not familiar with this Dominican thing about, well, this not even the state is a perfect society. But I'm guessing, I'm going to say what I think that means, and you can tell me that it's wrong. Everyone know what we're driving at when we say perfect society versus imperfect? Can I see a show of hands? Just you get the sense, okay, there's a lot of hands that didn't go up. So it's a fancy academic way of saying that if you have a society, let's think of what there are societies. There's the hunting club that you go to every month. There's the family. There's the state, the whole government. There's layers of jurisdictions, the feds, the state, the county, the city, the parishes, right, Mike, parishes, the boroughs, if you're in New York, God help you. And then there's the church. And the church, of course, has layers of jurisdiction, right? The summit is the Pope, who has, according to Vatican I, is the father. I mean, this isn't new, but it's made very precise in Vatican I. Exercises direct jurisdiction over every baptized person, as well as governing the church through the bishops and then through the pastors, and it's all nicely laid out in in canon law, And these are all societies, various kinds of societies. Perfect society merely means that it's self-sufficient. It means that it has everything within its power and its resources, etc., to accomplish its mission, whatever its particular purpose is. You can, like always, you can nitpick and nuance all of this and say, well, the church in a certain way, if she's visible, she's not a fully perfect society because she needs money from outside to build churches and to, pay the living for the priests and to buy vestments and liturgical furnishings, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the answer to that is that all the faithful who constitute and are members of the body of the church are contributing. Where are they contributing? Well, then the temporal side of it comes in. Somebody has to go to work, make a living, have money to spare to give to the church, to pay the priest, to build the architecture, et cetera, et cetera. So you're seeing, number one, how these societies interweave. And when you're in a Catholic nation and there isn't this Americanist and liberal, classical liberal sense. I'm referring, John, can you raise your hand, John, please? That young man there with the fancy hair is, we rode together on the way up. I picked him up in Pennsylvania. We had 5 hours. I listened to him for 5 hours in the car. And when we got out, sometimes... Oh, God bless you. Sometimes we're not picking up the audio. Sometimes you get out of the car and you're like, oh, it feels good to stretch my legs. There's other reasons to get out of the car too sometimes. But anyway, it was a magnificent conversation. Henderson's here, Brother Paul. It's good that he's here because you're losing a lot of heat with him behind you. So I'm not going to fuss at you at all this time. We were discussing this whole Dominican perfect society, church and state, this entire thing. And you really can, you can argue yourself into the position that there really can only be one society because the church needs human temporal resources, right? The church has to have money and people. And have you ever seen a liturgy performed with no people? I believe when they wrote the New Holy Week, that's what they did. And then they're like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's go with that. But in the real world, that's impossible. The argument about the state needing the church, I believe, brother, and I haven't read this exchange, is if you go back to the premise that law is to make man good, the extrapolation of that is the whole working of the social order, which I've said to you people, God bless you, so many times. I hope you believe me, that the primary good of social life is to facilitate the practice of virtue. It's not necessarily just or only, or certainly not primarily, to make money, to have material things, to have clothing, food, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. All those are givens because we are creatures of body and, thank you, just it's a wake-up check to make sure everyone's with me. But the primary purpose of living together, this comes right out of St. Thomas's little book to the king of Cyprus. How should I govern, the king hypothetically asks. And St. Thomas says, you must legislate or command what will help men to live well together. They live well together for a reason. And St. Thomas says they live well together not because they want food, clothing, shelter. They want this huge capitalist machine to crank out toys and video games and, gender-affirming care and all the great stuff that our society produces. Because Thomas says, any of you do livestock, any livestock, sheep, cattle, goats, what am I missing? Pigs, alpacas. Any alpaca farmers? Anyway, Thomas says the herd animals live together for the purpose of living well together. Why do the sheep stick together? Because they're a little dim and they're easy to pick off. And when a predator comes, they all run together. And they're like, yeah, we're not living well, but we're living together. Not going to be living for long. But so Thomas says very plainly, animals live together. Not all of them, but many of them live together. Flocks, herds, we have all kinds of names for it. If men are more than animals, they must live together for some other purpose. And the other purpose is to cultivate and facilitate the practice of virtue. And when the living together starts to militate against virtue, or starts to encourage the practice of vice, or make vice very easy, the king sins if he doesn't try to suppress it. And I'm not talking about the nanny state. I don't want the phone's going to, if you had your 800 number going, Mike, the libertarians would be lighting up the switchboard. We've got Ron Paul on the line. He's upset you're talking about government. Well, I'm sorry. That's part of the problem why they're not Catholics, these people, is because, or maybe what am I getting that backwards? They're not Catholic because they have this error in conception of government, or they are Catholics who don't understand the social teaching of the church. Either way, there's something missing. But men live together to practice virtue, and I would guess, brother, that since Thomas goes on to say, how does the king know what virtue is ultimately? You can get a lot of that from the natural law. All the classics, philosophers up to Aristotle and beyond, we know, we're told plainly, and I believe this is even a matter of faith. Fact check me if you would. The Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, the entire moral law is written on the human heart. So no one has an excuse to say, I didn't know fornication was wrong. It just, seemed like the thing to do at the time. Not so fast. You're gonna be held to account for that. But the intellect is dim, the will is weak, society is a mess. The king has to get the message as to what do I command and what do I forbid from somewhere. And the somewhere is, thank you, Holy Mother Church, right? She's the custodian. She doesn't create the moral law. We're told, as I mentioned, technically the moral law is already here, but most people get it wrong, parts of it. Even me, I admit, there's all kinds of things I wouldn't understand without Holy Mother Church. So the king has to learn from the priest. That's the words of Thomas's little booklet to the king of Cyprus. And in that sense, I'm guessing, you can't really say that the state is self-sufficient because the state must have the church in order to guide social life. So where does this lead us? I told you the Holy Ghost would take this over. It leads us to the politics of Christendom. That's what Christendom fundamentally is a collection of nation states, small entities, small societies, whatever, sometimes knit together in big empires, none of which were, Charles, you can correct this and when it's your turn, none of them were the empires, I believe, the way Pat Buchanan means, for example, when he says we're a republic, not an empire. We have in mind British, German expansion, crazy world takeover stuff, not the Catholic empires. There was certainly a lot of jockeying for influence, but it was never the sense of, one entity needs to control everything. But there was this period then when all this patchwork of nations and patchwork of jurisdictions took the Catholic faith for granted. And you can read that in two ways or hear it in two ways, right? One is it's assumed that the faith inspires the life of the nation. And you can argue about legislation. Is it prudent? Forgive me, this is a raw example, but it's important for clarifying the thought. Is it prudent to condemn private consensual sodomy? This was a huge legal issue in our history about 100 and some odd years ago. That's a question for the king, right? If anyone read Michael Davies on religious liberty, second Vatican, very famous treatment of the Vatican II's Dignitatis Humanae compared to the traditional teaching of the church, and this question comes up. Does the king do anything wrong? Does he violate his charter if he purports to legislate private conduct? Because what we grow up with in the United States, call it current or post or whatever kind of liberalism you wish, we grow up with the idea that, hey, what you do in private is your own business, right? That's a given. That's axiomatic from when I was a kid under Ronnie Reagan growing up. This America's great because the government doesn't get in our business. And the libertarians said, darn right she doesn't. We're going to keep her out. Well, take the worst example. I'm not going to get into anything graphic, but the entire problem of pedophilia and the abuse and all the stuff that's trafficked now in terms of, I use that word advisedly, on the internet about what's going on, islands and pizza and all that stuff. Is the king supposed to stay out of that business? As long as you are sodomizing a child in the privacy of your own home, the government has no business trying to put a stop to that. That's the real question. And I use that distasteful example on purpose to make the point as easy to follow as possible. This was the vision of Christendom, that conduct that's gravely violative or gravely offensive under the moral law is rightly subject to condemnation. And even in this country, again, if you look at the history, the legislation, several years ago when I was here, something was in the news about the whole sex change phenomenon, how this is just going crazy. Before Hegseth took over the DOD was paying for people to go get sex changes and paying for travel. When Roe v. Wade got overturned, certain states then ratcheted back the accessibility of abortion very quickly. And your tax dollars, which pays my retirement, so I want to say thank you, first of all. Thank you very much. But more importantly, and I feel guilty a little, but I'd rather have it than have it sent to Israel or Zelensky. So I'll keep it, if you don't mind. Happy to buy you a coffee later. The DOD's paying to have people get on a plane or a train or take a boat ride or get in a car to go to another state to get an abortion. The Department of Defense paying people to get into their vehicles or their transportation and go find a state where abortion is accessible. I mean, talk about the antithesis of Christendom, the idea that now the government, instead of just backing off saying, well, do whatever you want, this is apparently the classic, this is all right in my mind because John and I apparently I was talking to him for 5 hours and he finally couldn't wait to get out of the car. We were arguing about old school liberalism, the kind of liberalism that Leo XIII and Marcel Lefebvre condemns. How's my timer doing, by the way? Oh, great. Oh, look at that. Boy, you're in for it. 40 minutes? Can you handle 40 minutes? All right. I don't know if, yeah. Where did that come from? Thank you, Aaron. All right. Yeah, you're looking like you're already about to fall over. Excuse me. So we're having this argument about liberalism. What in its heyday, what did it mean? The kind of liberalism, when we use the phrase liberal Catholicism, we're looking at the writings of the 1800s, 19th century, and some very strong, sharp intellects, priests mostly, but not always. All of our friends whose names at this point escape me, Joseph de Maistre, for example, who's the Spaniard, the Donoso Cortez, all of these deep thinkers who at this modern period, after the Reformation has done its work, way after the pagan elements of the Renaissance have seeped into culture, which again, brother was referring to, after some of the upheavals, not the big socialist revolutions of the mid to late 1800s, but the earlier ones, certainly in England, that cut the head off of it's Charles I, isn't it? Charles, speaking of Charles I was right, yeah, and so the whole modern world is well in motion and well established by this time, mid 1800s. And you have some very hardline, serious Catholic thinkers. Again, some lay, some Louis Villot, another one, the great French journalist, shredding this liberal system, which in its purest, or to argue the point favorably to them, which is very difficult to do, the idea that I have a right as a human person to do what I want and mind my own business as long as I'm not hurting someone else. Well, then the example I gave you earlier comes in. Well, that is, damaging. And then liberalism starts to unravel very quickly because it says, well, who says it's damaging? I think he likes it, in fact. They tried that with me on the submarine. I'm like, not so fast. So what is the, sorry. What is, I mean, it's dangerous business, submarining, for many reasons. But liberalism immediately poses the question, well, who says that's wrong? That's what you think. It's not what I think. How does a society function that way? I'm sure I've told you many times. You could help me, Tony, with this. I believe it's Gertz v. Powell, or Gertz was the big Supreme Court case. If you study defamation, all of us have to become experts in the laws of libel, slander, and whatever, because you can't be too careful. Both from the standpoint of what might risk coming out of my mouth, but more like what they're going to write about me in the newspaper. You said, who got run out of town? That was you, Aaron, right? After I was there. Sorry about that. So in one of the famous cases on defamation, there's probably 4 or 5 big Supreme Court cases. The most famous is New York Times v. Sullivan. It's in the 60s, I think, 1967 or something. Does that sound right? Yeah, thank you. She says that's about right, plus or minus a couple of decades. So in this other one, Gertz, I'm pretty sure it's Gertz, and I'm pretty sure Powell was writing the opinion. The details don't matter. And this is a pot shot, I admit, because it's not really what he means. But just think of what it says, and think of a clerk for a Supreme Court justice, or maybe the justice himself writing this in one of the arguably most solemn documents that continues to shape law in our nation. He says, "There is only a false fact. There is no such thing as a false idea." That's word for word out of the mouth of a Supreme Court justice. And you're all rightly scandalized. I can see this is another test. Are we awake? You should pass out. But who in the United States would be scandalized by that? Well, of course. What do you think? There are true ideas? That's ridiculous. Who said they're true? You, Caesar? I mean, who put you in charge? Well, you mean my name is Caesar, but leaving that aside. So this is liberal, and so we can haggle this conversation, this 5-hour joyful car ride. I was going about 100 miles an hour. See if I could just get it to shorten for your sake, John, for your sake. But we were arguing about, is there really liberalism anymore? Is it post-liberal? Is it double post-liberal or post-industrial? Post-hermeneutic of discontinuity. I take the point because academics, they geek out on all this, like how to label these periods. But my thesis in the vehicle, I don't think I was successful in persuading him, but I have a whole weekend and a long car ride back, 5 hours to Pennsylvania. And I'm the driver too. So 5.5, he says. Who's counting? My position is that liberalism itself is an absolutely incoherent, untenable thing. So when you chuck the politics of Christendom and you chuck out the fundamentals, which Brother Francis and all of the pedagogues here do a much better job than I do of articulating and presenting more systematically without all the stand-up comedy. You chuck the fundamental principles of reason, which is like, how do I know that I'm here? Well, come here, I'll punch me, and then that'll give me the idea. You chuck the internal logic that gets you from those first principles to making conclusions about things. You all exist, the room exists, it's full of people. Conclusion, it looks like we're having a conference, right? It's common sense. The modern philosophers think, well, can't really be sure. Maybe it's all just like imagery. Maybe we're all just, in this highly coincidental way, having the same dream at the same time, and there's only one of them. Okay, maybe. Try that with the judge, though. Then think of the contradiction of liberalism. Your Honor, I stand accused of mass murder. I killed 40 people in a rock concert. I thought they deserved it. Well, I did too, but you took it a little too far. But first of all, I don't identify as the murderer, so off the hook, right? I actually identify as one of the victims, and you just got your people mixed up. And second of all, how can we be sure that they're really dead? You know, I mean, I asked that question about our friend Charlie from a few weeks ago, but that's a whole separate topic. How do we know that there's guns, that there's bullets, that we're even here? That, 10 years, life, no possibility of parole, next, right? No judge puts up with that nonsense. But that's the essence of what liberalism is. When you think of, and I'm fishing out of our conversation, when you think of the great little story, I don't think you could say it's a parable, but I will be corrected by the authorities, that our Lord tells about the man possessed by a fierce demon, and then he gets him out, and then 7 more come in. Well, when he's out, it's clean and swept, and it's vacant. It's a void, right? There's nothing there. And to show you how near and dear that whole concept is to the heart of liberalism, call it what you will, it's just the thing. I'm talking about the Platonic, whatever the thing is, maybe I'm using the wrong name, the thing that Leo XIII was arguing about. That emptiness, anyone remember the name Michael Novak? Michael Novak, famous hack for democratic capitalism. Catholic, that's the worst part. It's fine, there's other races, genders, passports, that we expect them apologists for capitalism, communism, high interest rates. That's fine. We know where they're coming from. We know where they stand. When a Catholic gets into it, then it's treasonous, right? Because you're betraying the Catholic position. So he goes on and on about the glory of democratic capitalism. And in his, I believe it's an introduction from 1984, not Orwell's book, but from the year 1984, an introduction that he writes to the Notre Dame University Press, used to be a Catholic place, before football took over, of Amintore Fanfani's Catholicism, Protestantism, and Capitalism. We have the humble joy and the hope of not only having printed it, but of continuing to print that book. It is a must-read for any Catholic who doesn't understand what is the church's position on the big economic question. The free market, capitalism, from a Catholic point of view, is it okay? You must read Fanfani. If you read Fanfani and you can refute him, I will listen to that attempt. But I submit to you that it's impossible. Anyway, Michael Novak, the great American neocon, capitalist, Catholic shill, writes the introduction to this Fanfani book in 1984 with Notre Dame's support. And what does he say? Democratic capitalism is a house that is empty to be filled up, but it is swept clean. And he uses this phrase, swept clean. And the first thing an even halfway thoughtful reader thinks is like, wow, that sounds like that guy that the 7 demons infested. And it's amazing that he chooses that phrase to talk about what's at the heart of liberalism, because the philosophers here know that evil is not a thing, right? It's a weird, my kids are always like, what do you mean? And my wife, like, how do you mean? I mean, you just punched me in the face. That seems evil. That's a thing. Well, yeah, but it's more technical. It's the absence of being, right? It's an emptiness where there should be something, which is why we're all not Buddhists, because when they go to heaven, apparently they'll just disappear, which is in one respect a good result, but we'd like them to save their souls in the meantime. But this is the heart of liberalism, is it's empty, because it says what Justice, I'm assuming it's Powell, so I beg your pardon if it's not, when he says there's no such thing as a false idea. And that's the antithesis of what Christendom was built on, is this acceptance. First, there's tolerance, right? And I get these, you'll correct me, I always get these mixed up of Constantine and Theodosius, but I think Theodosius actually brings the church fully into the empire, whereas Constantine lifts the penalty. Is that correct? I got that order right? Thank you. Really starting to lose it. I'm too young to go nuts, but thank you. Thank you. I mean, we're all a bit nuts. We have to be nuts in this world. So from that point, the Constantine-Theodosius dynamic duo of bringing the faith fully into the empire, or what Belloc would explain is then transforming into the nations of Europe. 500, put a pin in it, or in your timeline, 500, at least to 1,500, and then 1,500, our big milestones are Augsburg 1555 and Westphalia 1648. So from around 300 to 400s, but think 500, so you can do in easy chunks, to 1,500, this entire notion of there's no such thing as a false idea. And because there's no such thing as a false idea, we can't predicate social life and the politics. And when I say politics, I mean Aristotelian, not left versus right. I mean the business of men living together in society for the purpose of living well, We have that for 1,000 years. Got the point? And that's it's historically true, but it's also, in some respect, you could say, give me a text out of an encyclical that says I have to believe this as a Catholic. Well, those texts exist. You can't, and it is, that's why I get so angry with people like Michael Novak. Never met him. He could be dead now. I hope he went to heaven, if so. Otherwise, it would help if he weren't here making trouble. You're allowed to want people to go to heaven, aren't you, brother? Okay, thank you. I wish a lot of people would go to heaven. Bishop Williamson told me that once. I was complaining about one of the many horrible things that happened to me, and he said, "Oh, John, just tell him to go to heaven." So, and we all know what he meant, but it was very typical English, class with a little stiletto and class. That's what that man was all about. And think of Gary Potter. Think of how many of our people have left us. Doug, thank God you're still here. Charles, others. But look, Robert's gone. Robert is gone. Gary's gone. Williamson's gone. My mentor, Dr. White, the larger-than-life Shakespearean Catholic, converted 250 midshipmen probably at the Naval Academy during the course of his career. My old Irish radical friend is almost gone. He's the one who started the book business with me. It's sobering to think about watching these soldiers, slowly go to their rest. And it should, I think, put a little onus on us. This is why I engage in this 5-hour car ride, because John, who's going to be 28 in February, and the other John in front, you're way too young to retire. And many others, you have to come in, the next generation has to take over and has to take this torch and carry it forward. So with the 30 minutes that remaining, let us get into the substance of the presentation. Richard Weaver, we've all read Ideas Have Consequences. Hands up, please. It's very, we're not allowed to despair though, right, brother? Because I was almost going to say the D word. Yeah, but I don't want to because I'm not letting them off the hook. You must read, people. Read. It's short. It's big printing, big type. Ideas have consequences. It is the opposite of there's no such thing as a false idea. If you don't like all the Catholic heavy encyclicals, it's technical theology. What do you mean? Sanctifying grace, created grace, etc. I told you I was going to go there. Whatever. Read Weaver. He's not even Catholic, so it's like unoffensive. Like, oh, I don't know, this is all very internal, like just Catholics talking to each other. He's a high Episcopalian something or other from North Carolina, born in the very early part of the 20th century, who wrote, and Mike's nodding, thank you, Mike, I agree completely, one of the most important, maybe top 10 most important books of modern times. He's a Platonist, so for the Platonists out there, that's something to be extra drawn by. But the submission of Ideas Have Consequences, his thesis starts with a chapter, may even be the title of the chapter, I don't remember, where he refers to something called a metaphysical dream. And he says, and this is excuse my expression, it's a no-brainer, it's just a statement of the obvious. The metaphysical dream is the vision that a society has in common about what it's doing. No society can function without some sense of, like, what's our purpose? Today, it's to engage in foreign wars, to defend this rump state who took a piece of desert from the Arabs, and to funnel money to other countries making war on our archenemy Russia, because we're still apparently in the Cold War. And by the way, we make gobs of money because, after all, the business of America is business. That's our metaphysical dream. Anyone think that that's unfair? I mean, please tell me. No. I mean, is my characterization unfair? Like, am I off target in any way? Exactly. And so when I asked Charles if I was off target, he said, President Coolidge. I said, okay, I got it. Thank you. So anyway, sorry. I'll explain it later. Weaver says there's got to be this vision, and that's the vision of the United States. And as we know from this little pseudo-parable, when the house is swept clean, Mr. Novak, and the demons, it's nature abhors what? right? It's filled up with, and this is where my wife says, what do you mean evil doesn't exist? Well, there's a lot of stuff that fills up that vacuum, and it's all evil. So that's the one for, you can explain that, brother. I'll leave that to you. Weaver says the metaphysical dream of Christendom, as you know from people far better educated and better at presentation than I, the wisdom of Greece, the administrative prowess of Rome, and the Catholic faith produces Christian Europe, right? And that's Christendom. That's what it is. And Weaver, as a non-Catholic but a sympathizer, defends this notion that at the height of human history, when there was the correct metaphysical dream, because he says, of course there's such a thing as a false idea. The true idea is the idea of Christendom. It produced this civilization that stayed together until, and it's very interesting, he then steps through what were the seeds of its destruction. He goes all the way back to the nominalist problem of the 1100s. I will hear what you think about that, for a long time in the car. But it's early in the history of philosophy of Christendom that we start going towards the Justice Powell. Well, maybe there is a false idea, or maybe there isn't a false idea, and maybe it's all just labels. Maybe there is no thing that's justice. Maybe it's just what we call justice, and maybe justice is a dog. And like, well, maybe I'm a woman too. And you can see 1,000 years of corruption from this crisis in philosophy of universals. Like, is there really such a thing as good? And of course, we all say, well, yeah, ultimately it's God, right? Like, this is one of the many arguments for his existence is if we with our darkened intellects perceive certain things that in your heart, when you hear the sisters sing tomorrow and the brothers, and you hear Tomás Luis de Vitoria or Gabriele, or what's the other one we're doing? Gabriele Palestrina. Oh, the guy you mentioned in your talk, in fact. Different, same town though, right? Same town. When you hear that, there's something where you're like, wow, it's beautiful, but it's maybe ineffably beautiful. So where does all that come from? Well, it ultimately comes from God. And this entire vision, this precious thing that we're holding on to, the culture that flowers from that, was with us for this time. But the seeds of its corruption are sown very early, and it starts coming. Intellectually, it starts coming unglued very early. But anyway, Weaver says that all societies have one. We've talked now at length, I appreciate your patience, about this, what I would say is one of the essentials of Christendom, is this proper notion of law and authority and government, and what is it all for? It is to make men good. This is the idea that Christendom was built on. And let's think of, again, since we're in the substance of the talk, let's think of the reasons for hope. Well, first of all, Christendom existed in reality. There is every reason to have a hint of skepticism, maybe a hint of non-theological despair that it will ever be again. It doesn't seem apparent to us how we're going to get out of this mess and have another Christendom. Some windbag I know, probably anti-Semitic, had a couple conferences years ago called Rebuilding Christendom. And the mission hasn't yet been accomplished, right? I mean, there were 20 or 30 people afterwards like, yeah, we're very excited, let's roll. And, I'm kind of waiting. John finally showed up, thank God. But it did exist. It did exist. That's the fact that the church, not just in her insular way, but in terms of her outreach, if you will, that she was able to take these principles with the operation, of course, of sanctifying grace, with teaching, with the work of building, that a human society did exist where men and women like ourselves can feel that we're not at odds and harassed by society. And I don't know if you all feel this way, but it's just existing outside of these little bubbles that we're, brothers, happy, and we are grateful to you for creating these for us, because we come here and we're like, oh, there's a bunch of people that think there's such a thing as a false idea. How refreshing. It's nice to be here. But for most of us, including myself, it's only once a year or twice a year. It's not often. And when we're out in mainstream society, where we just did the caricature of what America's metaphysical dream is, think also of, just on a more kind of mix of doctrine and practice, the other part of modern society in general is it is dominated by the drive for acquiring money. It's dominated by money. And it's dominated by increasingly complex instruments for generating money. Has anyone checked the national debt for the U.S. lately? Do you have a current number, Mike? I mean, it's 37. I was going to say I'm just waiting for it to tick over to 38. 37.8, he says, almost $38 trillion. It is not a number that the human mind can even grasp. You can't even think of it, say, like envision a million pebbles out. You don't know what a million pebbles looks like. You barely get to 1,000. A trillion it's meaningless. It's meaningless. And if we ever start seriously rebuilding Christendom, then someone needs to get the book and an eraser and just go, whoosh, right? Because it's meaningless. It means nothing to anyone except that while I take the retirement pay that's financed, against the future, I guess now that I think about it, I shouldn't feel that guilty because I don't think it's coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of the ether, where the Fed just generates all of it. They sell it to Congress, and then Congress, does whatever the heck they do with it when it's not going to Zelensky or the Mossad. Right? But it's dominated by money, and then the instruments. The main argument against usury, the essence of it, is that money is sterile. Money doesn't reproduce. You can't remember It's a Wonderful Life, right? He says he's got 2 simoleons left, right, after he pays everyone off, and he puts them, and he says, go forth and multiply. But the medievals would say they won't. It's just 2 pieces of paper. You're going to look in the morning, and it's $2. But today, every person, I'm guilty because of a bequest. I didn't start it. I'm just the victim. Everyone who has anything that's like a stock or a bond or anything, who puts money aside and says, okay, I'm going to put $1,000 in this account. I'm going to look at it 10 years from now, and it better be up to like $57,422. That's usurious, but it's also a fiction because from a moral standpoint, you're doing nothing. You're not working for that. You're trying to generate cash expressly on the basis of not having to work for it. And this is precisely what we seem to keep coming back to my retirement. I'm now feeling bad again. The whole notion of retirement is, and I don't know if it was in your book, John, or in one of those papers that we were just reading somewhere. I mean, there's too many. We discovered, by the way, because I told you John has come out of the woodwork. God has sent him to try to help IHS Press get going a little bit. And I was showing him the computer this morning over at the Bryan's house. Publicly, thank you for allowing me to sleep in one of your beds, David. By myself. I just wanted to clarify because of the whole submarine thing. I didn't want you guys to have the wrong impression. I was showing John the computer and all the material that IHS has collected over 25 years. Ephemera, little pamphlets, newsletters, brochures, all from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, all from the Catholic world. There's 33,000 files on this laptop, which excludes what's in the paper archives of this militant expression of Catholicism not from the heyday of Christendom, but from the 1930s. So before I have 20 minutes, this is like interminable. It's like a usurious timer. The time just keeps multiplying. Much to your chagrin. But anyway, in this collection of papers, somewhere in one of these 33,000 files, which I'll never find again, there is a comment about the mentality of working until you drop dead at 50 so that you can then retire for 30 years and do nothing. And the point is being made by the author that I have no recollection of at this point. It's not a Catholic mentality, as Pius XI says in Quadragesimo Anno, man was born to labor as the bird is born to fly. It's part of what we do. It keeps us healthy, keeps the mind working. It hasn't panned out that way for me, but mostly, in a normal circumstance. It also has you participate in the creative work of God. That's why we digressed at the very beginning about this notion of art. Recta ratio factibilium, right reason applied to things that are made. That engagement with the rules of art is part of how man. It literally is what keeps you sane. It's part of what the human person is created to do. Is to work in that way. And so let's think of a few other. We talked about the domination of money. I've covered the perversion of modern society with all of my wisecracks, and I do beg your pardon if any of them are off. They're not off target. They may be off color, but it's partly a little bit of the shock jock approach to make people think seriously about how bad things are. And if we think of the Catholic definition, or the classical, really, it's not more classical necessarily than Catholic, of peace, and anyone tell us, like, how do we refer to, start with Latin, please, and then go to English. How is peace defined? Come on. Right, tranquilitas, tranquility, those are easy ones because the IAS is like the ITY in English. Ordinis, genitive, so it's of order, the tranquility of order. What kind of tranquility? The tranquility that comes from order. So, brother, you were talking about, and sister will tell us later about the hope, how it's frequently misused, misunderstood. You mentioned despair. There's theological despair, and then you're like, I despair of the bus coming on time because it never comes on time. That's, different sense with the same term. We hear the word peace, and peace normally means what modern men, especially Americans, take prudence. In our traddy Catholic world, since we're talking about Christendom, and we'll never give up because we have hope, we'll never give up talking about rebuilding Christendom. Because I believe it's the same as the spiritual life. You don't stay where you belong. You either go forward or die, or you're on the road to death. Now, temporally, we're all aiming for heaven, and that involves death in our condition. But we either build or we regress, and it gets worse. So we can't get ourselves off the hook of building. But you think of the way the term for peace is used, tranquilitas ordinis, the tranquility of order. The emphasis is not on tranquility. It poses the question, what kind of tranquility? Or more to the point, where does the tranquility come from? This is the essence of that term. Tranquility is not American. I worked, till I was 22. Somebody gave me a hedge fund, and I'm out for the rest of it. I just put my feet up. And I just watch my portfolio grow faster than the national debt. It's tranquility, but it's not the kind of tranquility we have in mind. Tranquility of order. Now we're back to, well, does that mean that everyone just sits in a line, like a nice fascist parade, which is sometimes fun to watch, I admit? Or does it mean that where it's in, they are, let's be honest, everybody thinks that's all cool. It's very interesting, but no one's willing to say it. Or it's not the order of the Gulag, right? Where it's like, I'm going to orderly take all you Siberian Christians and put you over here until you freeze to death. That's pretty ordered. But they're all very tranquil, right? Because they're frozen and they can't move. But it's not what kind of order we're talking about. We're talking about the order of Christendom, meaning, first of all, the moral order. The moral law, this whole concept of no such thing as a false idea, that's out. The ideas are in order. And the ideas then percolate into society and put society in order. And so if Caesar and I get in a spat over something, I can go to either, as our Lord says, I can confront him, or I can go to a neighbor, or I can get a tribunal of 3, or go to the judge, or go to the canon law court, because we know that the church was running a lot of the judiciary and the day-to-day machinery of the state for a long time, centuries. But I can use terms like, you sinned against commutative justice when you stole my bourbon. And he can say, you did that last week, and then change the label, and I caught you on tape doing that. And we can have an argument about what's fair and what's unfair, and all this excellent instruction I'm receiving at law school, thank you, regarding contracts and torts and civil procedure and all of that. All of those rules that govern how law is done, they all come from this era of order. Because the thesis, I think, that the Holy Ghost is developing is that you only have peace. Tell me if you buy this, based on all of this discussion. You only have peace in Christendom. Christendom is the only locus, if you will, the only incarnation in human history that has ever existed where the tranquilitas ordinis is tangible and visible and real, right? Because it's the only society that ever had proper order, understood in the fullest sense. So that's, needless to say, that's shot, and we've talked a little bit about how we go from 500 to 1500, and we have the revolutions, Renaissance, Reformation, all these forces working against Christendom and disordering, unraveling that order. And we go through a period of centuries, the liberalism, admittedly I take a pot shot at John because of the ride in the car was quite entertaining and enjoyable. I should say that for the record. But it's fun, cheap shots, I admit. But they're fun. I enjoy them anyway. That's the main thing. But we go through this period, and then this classical liberal era. This is where we started. The great minds of the 18 and early 1900s react to it. They tear it apart intellectually and just show how dumb it is for people to say, well, we're going to have a society with a metaphysical dream, because every society has one, where the dream is just kind of empty and like you do whatever you want and sort out how that works. We get that destroyed by the anti-liberals of the early, mid-18, and then into the early 1900s. And I have told all of you before, and it's getting less and less controversial as time goes by, that I firmly believe that the conflict that followed the First World War, known as the Second World, two comes after one, right? There is such thing as false math, too. The Second World War is an outgrowth of the first, needless to say. I mean, there's a lot of the rivalries that were stoked. They weren't put to bed. They were made worse, and so that's part of that sorting itself out. But what's going on before World War II? Before World War II, every country where there's a serious critical mass, if you will, of Catholics, including the United States, perhaps most conspicuously the United States, in this period, the Catholic position, I won't say the church, because as Brother pointed out, it's not a cult of personality. She exists, she's here with us, thanks be to God, all the time. So it's not individuals we're talking about, but the Catholic position, the ideas, the practice, some of the concepts, which I'll just name quickly, not just the Catholic concept of law and government, but particularly the remedy for capitalism. And I'll just get this out of the way. As a reminder, we as Americans, like, oh, socialism bad, capitalism good. Remember that the historical reality and the position of the church is that socialism is a response to the evil of capitalism. It's a response to an evil. It's an overreaction to an evil. And if you read Rerum Novarum, as soft and mild as it is, Quadragesimo Anno is a little bit stiffer and a little tougher. And Divini Redemptoris of Pius XI, which is his encyclical on what? Who said communism? Okay, thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Oh, I knew it would be you. You beat Doug, though. Especially Divini Redemptoris, Pius XI points out very, very, very clearly that socialism is a reaction to the evil of liberalism, even. He doesn't name capitalism, he says liberalism. There's a vacuum. The vacuum allows the workers to be dominated at the expense of money, and the non-Catholics cry out and they say, let's kill all the owners, right? It's a kind of natural guttural response if you're not Catholic. So let's just be clear, as Americans who are always knee-jerking, oh, that's socialist. Can you mail me a letter? No, I don't interact with the post office. I don't get involved in these socialist government enterprises. I'll just get on a horse and ride it over to your house. That's great, but socialism's not the problem. Let's be very clear about that. It is not the problem. It is a reaction to a problem. And the Catholic position that's moving forward in the 1930s is addressing the problem in a fully Catholic way. By doing what? By referring expressly in 33,000 electronic documents, plus the hundreds that I have, back home in the office in brown paper that they've been wrapped in for 10 years. I can't seem to get around to dealing with any of it. Please help me. The Catholic position in response to this capitalist idea, and then incidentally or tangentially tackling the socialist reaction, is to look back to Christendom. Every pamphlet, and I'm exaggerating to make a point. I'm sure you can find one. Well, it's not in here, Commander. You're wrong. Okay. Most of them refer expressly to Christendom and expressly to the Middle Ages. And we all know Ralph Adams Cram. So that name rings a bell. Great, fantastic. Doug, you know Cram, of course. Doug knows it all so much he doesn't even raise his hand anymore. He's just like, oh, yeah, here we go again. Cram, magnificent, conspicuously famous architect, high Anglican, like so high of an Anglican, he's an Anglo-Catholic, where he says, well, I'm a Catholic, I'm just part of the English church. It's like, Henry was. He was, in fairness, he was Catholic for a long time, that guy, before he exploded. Cram built did the architecture, not built the architecture. It's so ridiculous. I told you I'm losing it. Cram designed the buildings. Is that okay, David? That's more correct. Designed the buildings for West Point, Princeton, numerous college campuses, all in the Gothic revival style. He followed Wesley Pugin, the great Gothic revivalist in England, who was a big fan of Gregorian chant, I might add, because obviously, as we all know, proper church architecture is yes, it glorifies God. I admit that's number one, but in close competition it's a space for music. That's what, let's be honest, that's what the architecture is for music, right? Yes? I mean, come on. Okay, argue with me later about that. Anyway, in this high Gothic revival, Cram, famous architect, I was doing when I was working on the PhD before I got fired because my white nationalist dissertation supervisor died, and then no one was left to help me, so they kicked me out. After I passed all my oral and written exams and my dissertation prospectus committee and all that, then they're like, oh, he's dead and you're gone. Okay. I guess I got to hightail it up to New Hampshire. It's the last place they keep having me back, and that's always, every year I wonder. Cram designed the architecture for a synagogue, by the way, because he was a regular businessman who, if they wanted a nice building, he did the building. And my Jewish professor who read my paper saying Cram, designed a synagogue, here's what I'm doing. Middle Ages is great. Old World Catholicism, beautiful cathedrals, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and by the way, he was hired to do a synagogue and blah, 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 blah. So as the professor, nice Jewish man, is reading the paper, I can just tell from a great distance. I was going to Delaware, and I live down in Virginia still. I could just tell there's smoke coming out of his ears, like, oh, Catholicism, that's awful. The guy's probably got an oven in his basement. This is horrible. And then all of a sudden he stops, and he writes in the margin, wow, He designed a synagogue? I wouldn't have expected. So when I went to talk to him, I said, well, why don't you let me know why you find that so shocking? Because that's the best response, right? When you say, oh, the interest rates are too high. It's like, you're anti-Semitic. Like, I didn't make that connection. I said nothing about any of that. Look, what are you talking about, interest? I thought it's the Irish who run all the banks. What's your problem? But this Cram, to get back to the point, lucky for you, now there's 7 minutes. I know that thing's finally working. I've been begging for single digits. If you think of Cram, what was that, Aaron? Okay, yeah, the lapel mic is busted. Cram, as a professional architect, highly regarded. Just look up the history of architecture in the United States. Cram is all over it. Cram is going to mainstream academic historical conferences, giving lectures titled The New Middle Ages. This is what we were genuinely just looking at, where within the first few paragraphs of the notes for his lecture, he's saying, following the destructive, disordering forces of the Renaissance, the revolutions, the Reformation, and upward before that, he refers to the Protestant revolt and the Protestant rebellion and the destruction of Catholic. The guy's not a Catholic. He thinks he's a Catholic, but let's be honest, he's not our kind of Catholic. But this is what they're talking about in 1910 and 1920 and 1930. And every nation in Europe and this country and Australia, and I've seen the archives at all these places, they're all talking about how we must rebuild the Middle Ages, not in time, turn the clock back 1,000 years, my watch doesn't go back that far, but in spirit and in practice. Because one of the chief tools in this toolkit of reconstructing Christendom is the whole idea of the guilds and of property ownership as the remedy to the evils of capitalism. And ultimately, I'll burn a half a minute and say that as we know, the chief problem intellectually, very quick bumper sticker, postage stamp, you can memorize this. The problem of capitalism is it separates capital and labor, right? Is you have gobs of money, and the money then acquires plant, which is the sort of industrial term for all your outbuildings and your machinery and your electricity and you need power plants to run all the machinery that's powered by electricity. And all of this infrastructure that's all owned, not by the manager, but by some financier who's very remote from the issue. Weaver gets into this superlatively in Ideas Have Consequences, which I beg you to read. Please read. I'm going to ask you again next year. Please read Ideas Have Consequences, if I'm back. And the laborer is the guy who owns nothing. And this is where the term, we talked about socialism being a reaction. This is where the Marxists and the socialists and the communists get the term, it's an ancient Roman term, proletarian, Someone who doesn't own. Oh, it's the proles. I mean, that's the kind of the rabble, right? Caesar Augustus over here would say, oh, the proles are at me again. But technically what that means is someone who's a non-owning wage earner, because all you own is your time. You do whatever you can with your time to bring money in, and then you eat, and then you drop dead. No retirement for you, because the masters and the owners retire. You don't retire. You work until you're dead. And of course, Dickens has explained this whole system with great vibrance, in his interminable novels. But in the 30s, every country in Europe and the United States and Australia, so the English-speaking world, I haven't accessed, outside of Europe, non-English-speaking, whatever that subset is. They're all talking about the medieval guilds. They're all talking about what's wrong with capitalism. They're all explaining, even Fulton Sheen in his great 1948 Communism and the Conscience of the West is explaining how socialism's not the problem, it's capitalism. And the church is opposed to capitalism because, as Chesterton says, there aren't enough capitalists. The working man must own something, which is right out of Quadragesimo Anno. All of these ideas are pushed and given back to us in the 1930s. And there's an Oxford historian that I'm not going to be so naive as to say, oh, go find this and read it. I know you won't. So I'll tell you. Martin Conway is the man's name. And he studies Catholic politics, Catholic political movements in Europe from about 1919 to 1960. And he's a mainstream big shot from Oxford. He is not one of our people. He's not a proletarian, if you will, or rather a polemicist is what I mean to say, who just pushes the Catholic line. He says every country in Europe had a vibrant Catholic movement, not just handing out green scapulars, rosary processions, whatever. The guilds, the whole notion of reuniting a worker with his tools so he owns something and so he can apply his labor to what he owns and derive the benefit. They're very suspicious of democracy. This is something that hasn't come up because I think we're way past any of that even thinking. According to John, no one believes in it anymore, so I didn't address it. But we hear about it a lot. It's a buzzword, right? And in the 30s, all of these movements are saying, well, we kind of need strong executive, peasant proprietorship, and cut out the representative bodies because there's just where you buy votes. All the representative bodies are dominated by money. That's the thesis in the 30s, and that's what Belloc says as he explains Louis XIV and the Charleses and all of it. Every Belloc history is in some way or another related to the problem of how the king is trying to defend the peasant from the money, and the money is centered in Parliament. Because that's where, if you question 9/11, you won't be reelected. Well, how did that happen? Well, $300 million just came into my opponent's, campaign fund. Gee, I wonder where that came from. Same people, but I digress, and thank God I'm going to be cut off here in a minute and a half. But that's why the parliaments have to go, because they are just creatures of capitalism, because they're creatures of money. And in the 30s, this idea was gaining great traction. And we all know, in terms of the United States, who in the United States in the 1930s, after he had a quick falling out with FDR, was on almost every radio in the United States? Charles Coughlin. Almost took over the country, in a manner of speaking. He had the power to affect the outcome of a federal election for the chief office of the United States. A Catholic apologist for the guilds, for the Catholic understanding of usury, the Catholic understanding of capitalism, the Catholic understanding of ownership, and ultimately the Catholic vision of the tranquility that comes from order, the real order of Christendom. A man who was the spokesman, almost in effect, as I said, I'm paraphrasing for effect, took over the United States. It was possible. And how was that ended? World War II ended that, right? Because World War II became good guy American capitalists who believe that there's no such thing as a false idea and have this empty thing that's swept clean, that's filled with demons on the one hand, and the Soviets who react to it, because you got to have an enemy. And if Raytheon's going to continue to build missiles, we have to have someone to shoot them at and some argument to make about how Zelensky needs them or someone needs them. Or now apparently we're going to sell Tomahawks to the Europeans, right? They fly 1,000 miles and have nuclear warheads put on them, and we're going to sell those to Europe to be given to Zelensky. That's a brilliant idea, isn't it? Wonderful. So that's what's happening in the 30s, and everyone's like, oh, this is going to get out of hand. We can't have this Catholic vision succeed, so we will squeeze it out of existence with the great ultimate polemic and what I would call psyop result, and now you are saved by the buzzer or by the cattle prod. You're probably going to get me with something. I'll bet this is one of those pagers. That's making me nervous. I should just hold it out. I can lose my left hand, I guess. I'll just hold it out like that. The bottom line is this psyop that is World War II and results, it's really the aftermath, right? I'm not worried about the events. It's the aftermath. The aftermath is, and listen, think of how clever this is, and I will close with this. If you say, well, I'm in favor of the Catholic vision, well, what is that? Well, first of all, it's the right of the government to have a worldview that is made effective in governing. The government says, as Maritain says, before he went crazy with the Action Française problem, 1926, 3 reformers, the chapter on Descartes, he says, if the city, namely that's the French, high-level French word for the state, they call it the city, explain it to me. There was a local here who can explain it to us. I'd love to hear his explanation. The city sins against justice if after sufficient proofs are provided of the truth of the Catholic faith, it refuses to adopt Catholicism as the state religion. 1926, Jacques Maritain, arch-modernist who backed Paul VI, and whose ideas apparently were behind Vatican II, says in 1926, the city sins against justice if it doesn't become Catholic. That's what we're talking about in 1926. Fast forward 100 years from now, I hope, acknowledging the theme, that we have enough of this vision that we can look at the international ills and the national ills that I've briefly cataloged and get off our, rear end, I was told, from the front seat. Get off our rears and at least read Ideas Have Consequences. But then, all kidding aside, get on with rebuilding Christendom. Thank you very much.
The long-form version of that will be published later. So, we're going to take a break for lunch, and then we come back. Sister Maria Gabriela, Blessed Are the Helpless, a message of hope for the weak ones of the world. Don't make me put the bell on you at 1:30 prompt. Correct, brother? Yeah. We'll do Angelus here? Yeah. Okay. Brother, you will lead us in Angelus? Yeah.